to consider. In the process, I hope we can finally end the political games and return to the responsibility of governing. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I hope you will forgive me if I try to limit myself to what is actually in the resolutions and the bills that we are presenting today as far as the Rules Committee is concerned. There is, though, a common thread that runs through the two resolutions that happen to be here, and deals with the definition of what is administrative and what is legislative. And even if the current administration seems to have a problem in making that definition of what is administrative, we in Congress need to and clearly understand what is our legislative responsibility. Our good friend Louis Gohmert from Texas always says that he who fails to learn the lessons of, he who learns the lessons of history will find some other way to screw it up. That's probably true. And I don't want to sound like an old history teacher, but I am. So I do want to say that there are some of the things that we in Congress should be doing to learn from our past history. John Page in 1791, a congressman from Virginia, was on the House floor when it was determined whether the House was debating on whether they stuck around to actually determine where postal routes should be. People wanted to go, and more importantly, the people trusted the President. So the question was, why don't we just let the President do it all? It was John Page who stood up and said, I may move to adjourn and leave all objects of legislation to the President's sole consideration and direction. He shamed Congress into doing their jobs of writing the legislation and not allowing the executive branch, the administration, simply to do everything by fiat. We sometimes have forgotten that. In the TARP language, we put in language like the Secretary of the Treasury will be able to purchase troubled assets on such terms and conditions as are determined by the Secretary, or authorize any purchase on which the Secretary determines promotes financial market stability, or the Secretary is authorized to take such action as the Secretary deems necessary to carry out all authorities in this particular act. That is legislative authority that we passed on to the executive branch. That was a tragic mistake. We should not incorporate that tragic mistake wider now by simply allowing the executive branch to take on responsibilities and authorities on their own free will and volition. We had this same situation once again in the history of this country. We had a President of the United States who wrote a book about Congress without ever visiting Congress itself, who said what the Founding Fathers realized, in which their effort to have vertical separation of power between state and national government, what we call federalism, and horizontal separation of powers between the three branches, which we call the separation of powers, and every public school student is taught that. They were put in there so that individual liberty, which I always consume to be individual choices and options in running their lives, would be protected against the concentration of power in one branch or another. Now, this former President of the United States called this separation of powers political witchcraft. He said it was wrong to try and separate powers, perplexingly subdivided and distributed to be hunted down in out-of-the-way corners. An earlier president than him thought, the President of the United States elected by everybody, Congress by a few people, courts by none, therefore ignore the courts, which has some appeal, but at the same time the President should speak for the government. This other president, coming back later, built upon that, so he increased the role and power of the executive branch under the concept the President is the President of the whole people, and therefore he has the ability to transcend separation of powers. His effort to improve democracy was to eliminate democracy and instead ensure that decisions were not made by the people or the voice or representatives of the people, but by experts, experts who were serving in the administrative branches. If you like that concept, you call it the administrative state. If you don't, we call it nanny government. Nonetheless, that was the concept. One of the other presidents that came shortly before him said there will be little permanent good that can be done by any party if we fail to regard the states as anything other than a convenient unit for local government. He said there is no harm that comes by concentrating power in the hands of one individual. He also said that he would not be content with keeping his talents undamaged in a napkin. That's perhaps why the Speaker of the House at the time said he had no more use for the Constitution than a tomcat has for a marriage license. The bottom line of what happened in the history is that all of a sudden we found that the Founding Fathers, who believed in people and believed in the legislative branch, listening to John Locke, who said you cannot transfer the power of the legislature to another branch, those type of people were decided at that particular time that the people should not be running their own affairs, that government experts should be making that policy. So to be honest, when we're talking about the first resolution that deals with TANF, the welfare issue, I don't care if the waiver is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It is still extra-constitutional, and it should not be used, and Congress should not allow it to take away what is the role of Congress and only Congress to establish these issues and set these boundaries. In the other bill that we're talking about prohibiting future actions by entities, in this case specifically the EPA, which would destroy jobs, increase the cost of our utilities, that would cost greater costs of lighting homes and heating homes, especially for those who have the least ability to do so. Congressmen and congresswomen must stand up and insist that Congress create these standards and create these options not being made by executive fiat. That is the very purpose of why we are here. The first president to whom I referred ended up with a legacy of many programs implemented which we still today find controversial. He was labeled by historians as an arrogant president at that time who refused to talk to Congress. And because of that, he lost some of his last most precious programs in an effort to try and go around Congress rather than working with Congress. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's why this resolution is before us and why these two separate bills are here. Both of them attempt to set the record straight and learn that it is Congress's responsibility to set the rules and the guidelines. It is not an administrative prerogative. And we as Congress need to step forward and say, we are the ones who do this. We should not allow it to be done by anyone else, regardless of why it's being done or the merits of why it's being done. It's our job. We should learn from history. We should be more like John Page and try and make sure that Congress does these types of issues and makes these types of decisions, and less like presidents later on who thought the president speaks for everybody, then the president has every right to transcend separation of powers and do it for himself. That's the basis of these two bills. That's the important issue. We should learn the lesson of history. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. You know, Republicans are saying that there is a war on coal. They even named this bill the End the War on Coal Act. But the only battle coal is losing is in the free market. To natural gas, to wind, to solar. Just 4 years ago, coal generated 51% of our electricity. Now it is down to 35% of our electricity. Have the lights gone off? No. And that's because coal has been replaced in the free market by natural gas, which has risen from 21% to 30% of all electrical generation in our country. And by the way, the same thing is true for wind. Wind has gone from 1% of electrical generation to 4% of electrical generation. That's your answer. That's what's happening. The marketplace has moved to natural gas, another fossil fuel, by the way, and wind. And why have they done so? Natural gas is cheaper than coal. It's more plentiful now because of fracking technologies. And the market has moved. What is happening? What is happening is that natural gas prices have gone down 66% in the last 4 years. Can I say that again? Natural gas prices have gone down 66% in the last 4 years. That's the shift from coal over to natural gas. That's the arithmetic. You're a consumer, you see a product, it does the same thing as the other product, and it's dropped 66% in price. The arithmetic says I go and get that product if it's going to ensure that my home is heated, that my air conditioning goes on. It's just arithmetic. Coal is losing to natural gas. So when the Republicans say there is a war on coal, well, in a market sense, yes, there is a war. In the same sense that when we started carrying BlackBerries, it was a war on the black rotary dial phone. In the same sense that when we started using Macs and PCs, it was a war on typewriters. In the same sense that the horseless carriage was a war on horses. In the same sense that refrigerators were a war on salted meats. In the same sense that the telegraph was a war on carrier pigeons. These aren't wars. This is innovation. It's competition. It's natural gas versus coal. All we're saying as Democrats is let the free market work. You're here saying, no, protectionism. Protectionism against the natural gas industry winning this battle in the marketplace. By the way, natural gas is also winning the battle in the marketplace against home heating oil. Tens of thousands of people are shifting over from home heating oil over to natural gas. Why? It's cheaper. The same thing is true in the production of petrochemicals and fertilizers. Industries are moving away from oil as the component part of moving over to natural gas. Why is that? It is cheaper. It's across the board. Do you understand this, Republicans? It's arithmetic. It's simple. It's easy to understand. It's not the policies of the Obama administration. If you want to blame someone, blame Adam Smith for ruthless Darwinian, paranoia-inducing market system that we've adopted where utilities and private citizens and petrochemical industry move towards a product which is cheaper, more available here in the United States, a domestic industry that is here. Instead, you know, this is a Republican Congress which has 302 anti-environmental votes, which they've cast in just a year and 8 months. 302 anti-environmental votes. That's what they're all about. This whole thing is an excuse to lower the protection against pollution coming from coal that damages the health of children, the health of our environment all across our country, when they're just losing a battle to natural gas in the marketplace. They get an F on Medicare, this Congress, F on tax breaks, F on jobs, F on urgent priorities, F on women, and an F on environment. It's just an excuse, okay? Because they don't like what's going on in the marketplace, you know? And it's a shame because they tout themselves as that party. Simultaneously, you know what they do? They're killing the wind tax break, killing it because it's up to 4% electricity and keeping the exact same amount in for ExxonMobil and the oil companies to produce oil. Now, how can you call that a plan of all of the above? All of this tilts the playing field, tilts the competition in the marketplace. You can't give tax breaks to oil and take them away from wind and say you're all of the above. You can't say we want to tilt the playing field towards coal as natural gas is winning in the marketplace and say you're in favor of all of the above. You are not. You are not. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask for a no vote on this rule, a no vote on these bills as they come to the floor of the House. It is anti-market policy on steroids as they bring it out here on the House.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Utah.
With gratitude for the last speech, which was such a stirring support of fracking, which has made gas so plentiful and useful in this country, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Utah, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill we are considering today is very simple. It's a bill that protects one of the nation's most abundant and cheap energy sources, coal, and ensures that some of the highest-paid family wage jobs in the country are saved. I want to focus on Title I of H.R. 3409 that limits the authority of the Secretary of the Interior to issue new burdensome regulations under SMACRA until the end of 2013. This title will put a short timeout on the recklessly rushed rulemaking by the administration that has resulted in millions of wasted dollars and confusion by all parties regarding the current management of coal by the Office of Surface Mining. This rulemaking has been an unmitigated disaster, with the administration attempting to compress what ordinarily would take 36 months into 15 months. When news got out about how many jobs would be lost under these proposed rules, the administration fired the independent contractor who provided the analysis. The administration's own analysis is that 7,000 direct mining jobs would be lost, and an additional 29,000 people would fall below the poverty level in the Appalachian Basin alone. The proposed rules would have a negative economic impact in 22 states. How in the world can a president who gives lip service to creating jobs allow his bureaucrats to kill jobs in coal states? This bill will simply give OSM a timeout so they can hear and address the concerns raised by the cooperating agencies, coal mining states and tribes and citizens. It will allow states time to read the hundreds of pages of materials in months rather than days. The current rulemaking by OSM is an out-of-control process with no regard for mine workers and their families who depend on these jobs. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution and the Johnson bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Mr. Lauro.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 2 minutes.
Speaker, I rise in opposition to this political resolution that aims to wrongly characterize the administration's position on temporary assistance to needy families. This is a waste of our time. The purpose of the administration's waiver proposal is to allow states to test alternative and innovative strategies that are designed to improve employment outcomes for needy families. As the Department of Health and Human Services has said repeatedly, waivers will only be approved if a state can prove that there is an effective transition from welfare to work. In essence, that they are putting more people to work. Is the majority now against putting people to work, or are they against states' rights? If so, they may want to tell their presidential candidate. In 2005, Mitt Romney and 28 other Republican governors wrote a letter requesting more, and I quote, flexibility to manage their TANF programs and, quote, increased waiver authority. This is exactly what the administration's waiver proposal does. For 2 years now, instead of working with us to create jobs, instead of passing middle-class tax cuts, instead of passing the Violence Against Women Act, instead of passing responsible deficit reduction, and to help us to try to get the economy moving again, the urgent priorities that we should be working on right now, this majority has continually put forward politically motivated resolutions. You know, I will just say to you that the American people cannot afford a do-nothing Republican Congress that refuses to act on issues critical to the middle class, critical to small businesses, critical to farmers, critical to women. They need to expect better leadership from us. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution. We need to get work done, not politically motivated resolutions.
Gentleman from Utah.
How much time do you want? 3, and I give you back. I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to the Chairman of the Science Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
And I thank you, and I rise in strong support of the rule and H.R. 3409, the Stop the War on Coal Act. And this may sound a little strange to a guy from an oil and gas state, but we have an awful lot of coal. This bill takes a number of simple, common sense, and long overdue steps to rein in the Obama administration's out-of-control EPA, which is waging all-out war on American energy, and coal is at the heart of that war. Anyone who fails to believe such a war exists should speak to the people of Mount Pleasant, Texas, in my congressional district. EPA's cross-state air pollution rule threatened 500 jobs at 2 coal-fired power plants in Mount Pleasant. Fortunately, the courts threw out this rule in August after finding that EPA went well beyond the law in its efforts to regulate coal out of existence. We know EPA will go back to the drawing board. H.R. 3409 adds needed protections for any future proposal, and in doing so protects jobs not only in my state, but in coal-producing states and coal-using states all around the country. The bill also blocks future efforts to attack coal through other regulations, most notably the EPA's effort to enact economy-wide restrictions on greenhouse gas emissions. These rules are based on shaky science and would raise the cost of energy for all Americans. They should never see the light of day. I want to mention my support for two amendments made in order under this rule that will be offered by members of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which I chair. These amendments address serious problems with EPA science that the committee highlighted during the 112th Congress. Specifically, Congressman Dan Benichek's amendment that requires that an analysis of the cost of regulations explicitly evaluate the potential negative health effects of regulations. Energy and Environment Subcommittee Chairman Andy Harris' amendment would require that the scientific data EPA uses to justify its regulations is peer-reviewed and made publicly available. These amendments reinforce and strengthen the transparency and openness provisions in H.R. 3409. I urge members to support these amendments, the rule, and the underlying bill as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. As one who believes in the value of work, I voted for the 1996 law to transform welfare to workfare. And now, as the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee overseeing this law, I want to strengthen reform and assure that every able-bodied American who can work is working. You know, people like Mitt Romney's father, who long ago was on a form of welfare himself before he became wealthy. Those are the kind of people that should be working. Unfortunately, Republicans talk work for everyone else, but when it comes to doing the work here in Congress, well, they don't quite measure up to it. It's just like the expired federal education law. They've been in power here for over 20 months, and we wouldn't need any changes or waivers in the law if they'd done their job to renew workfare. The real question here is not whether we emphasize work, but how. How we achieve the most effective ways to get more people working. This administration has simply responded to Republican governors and some Democrats who are seeking more flexibility and less bureaucratic paperwork, who sought better ways to get more people working. Even the Republican staff director who wrote the original 1996 reform law and who recently surveyed 42 state TANF directors says that these Republican attacks are exaggerated. So why? Why in the world would Republicans be here today when there is so much other work that this Congress has failed to do, be here presenting what is really an anti-work resolution masquerading as pro-work? Well, I think it's because, particularly during this week, such a very difficult and troubling week for Mitt Romney, they're a little desperate. They think they can hoodwink enough Americans to turn on their neighbors by falsely dividing us between makers and takers, between manufacturers and moochers, between producers and parasites. That is not America. Whenever they bump into an inconvenient fact like what actually is involved in this legislation, they just ignore it. They have made this Congress largely a fact-free zone. When confronted with reality, they hold up those signs that say believe. They left a word off. It really should say make believe, because that's what's at stake here. And fantasy, the fantasy that they bring us on all aspects of this measure, fantasy is a mighty poor way to govern America. I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah.
Reserves.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the rule in the underlying bill, the Polluter's Bill of Rights. I understand that my Republican friends are trying to improve the coal industry's outlook. And I imagine that most industries would benefit if Congress simply eliminated their obligation to help keep the public safe. We hear a lot about the immorality of leaving our children with mountains of debt, and I completely agree with that. I support measures to responsibly reduce the debt. But bills like this one are piling another form of debt on our children. We are leaving them to deal with the consequences of letting coal companies pollute the air that our children breathe and the water that they drink. Our failure to take comprehensive action on global climate change is already profoundly immoral. It is a disgrace that we refuse to sacrifice on behalf of our grandchildren. I fail to understand the perverse notion that my colleagues on the other side share that somehow global climate change is a laughable matter, that we can sweep under the rug instead of an unprecedented threat to the health of our children and to the security of our nation. How many more millions of tons of greenhouse gases would my Republican colleagues like in our atmosphere before they're concerned? How much less polar ice? How many more cases of preventable cancer should American children develop? I offered an amendment to slow down the bill's assault on America's environmental laws until scientists could verify that what this Congress seeks to accomplish would not increase cases of preventable cancer among our most vulnerable, children, seniors, and those with chronic conditions. Regrettably, the House will not even have a chance to vote. It must be too inconvenient for my colleagues to have to tell their constituents that they value these coal companies above sick children. Well, I've got news for my colleagues. Ignoring the consequences of our actions does not make them go away. These rules are in place because the American people demand safe air and water. They expect the electricity that powers their homes is not produced in a way that makes tumors grow in their loved ones. We should focus on building a nation, a secure economic future in this nation. That means investing in clean energy industries instead of catering to special interests. Moving forward with clean energy is the least we can do. Passing this bill is the worst thing we can do. I urge my colleagues to reject the bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Utah.
Reserves.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time except one more, and we want to defeat the previous question. And I'm going to offer an amendment which proposes that Congress will not adjourn until the President signs the middle-class tax cut into law. And additionally, I want to make an amendment that would extend the renewable energy tax credit. These tax credits are directly responsible for creating more American jobs, and allowing them to expire will mean fewer manufacturing jobs at home and more jobs sent overseas to China. We cannot afford to leave town without extending them. To discuss our proposal, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Boswell.
Is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today is Thursday, September the 20th, and tomorrow, I understand, the House is set to adjourn until after the election. Tomorrow, the House is set to leave town without finishing the work the American people sent us here to do. Now, I have no objection to increasing domestic energy production, and I think an all-the-above approach is a rational approach to take. However, I rise against this rule. I rise in opposition to the rule because 2 amendments that I had offered to the bill were not made in order by the Rules Committee. And the amendments I offered were on substantive policy that my constituents are calling for, and I'm here to stand up for and represent my constituents in Iowa, and I might add across the nation. One amendment would extend the wind production tax credit. Wind energy plays a significant role in electricity generation in the state of Iowa and many other states, for us about 20%, and the manufacturing of wind turbine components in Iowa has brought high-tech manufacturing jobs to my district. The fact that the House is set to adjourn until the election while this industry is being forced to lay off workers because of Congress's inaction is shameful. It's something we should not do. Yesterday it was announced we would be laying off 400 and more to come. Another amendment that I offer would have allowed the House to finally vote on a farm bill, But once again, the Republican leadership, this House, stopped the House from voting on a farm bill. Let me say that again. The House Republican leadership is preventing this House from working its will on the farm bill. Mr. Speaker, apparently some House Republicans believe standing up for our farmers and ranchers across our country is not worthy of the House. This is a disgrace. Inaction of the farm bill is creating the market uncertainty that the House Republicans so often decry. And this uncertainty will only get more complicated as the House continues to kick the can down the road. So once again, I rise in opposition to this rule, and I call on my colleagues to defeat the previous question so we can amend the rule and proceed to a debate that will result in the House actually doing the work that our constituents sent us here to do, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have some empathy from the gentleman from Iowa, but I will have to say one of the reasons that those amendments were not made in order was, quite frankly, because both of them were non-germane to the base bill. And that becomes the concept. One of the reasons that Ms. Slaughter speaks on wishing to stay here until we pass middle-class tax cuts, I think I can approve of that. Because actually, when we considered H.R. 8, the Rules Committee took an extraordinary step of waiving rules of the House, including cut-go and other budget-related points of orders, so an amendment could be given by Mr. Levin and have an opportunity to present that amendment. That amendment was debated, and it was rejected on a bipartisan vote on the House in August. And unlike the amendment, then H.R. 8 passed the House with a bipartisan vote, which means the House has voted for a middle-class tax cut. We have done our duty. It is one of the myriad of bills that is sitting over on the Senate side waiting for them to do something so that we can proceed to a conference committee. So I actually approve of what the gentlelady from New York was saying, because basically we've done it, and we did it on August 1st. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I do have a late entry here. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank my friend for yielding. 102 days from today, every American who pays income taxes will face a substantial tax increase. 102 days from now, the estate plans of small business people will be blown asunder because of the changes in the tax code that will automatically occur if that doesn't happen. 102 days from now, workers at defense plants, medical research institutions, other very important functions in our country will lose their jobs because of an across-the-board spending cut called a sequester. The response of the majority to this looming problem is to leave town. Now, I must confess that given the majority's propensity to end the Medicare guarantee and provide tax cuts to millionaires, perhaps them leaving town does have a certain appeal. But under these circumstances, where there is a significant problem in our country, where farmers all across the country have no idea under what rules they will be running their farms and their businesses, because a farm bill that received broad support from Democrats and Republicans in the Agriculture Committee has not made its way to the floor. In light of all this trouble, amidst all the stress of the American economy, the plan for the majority is to leave town tomorrow until after the election. This is irresponsible in 2 ways. First, I think we have a duty to act before the election so the voters of this country can assess where we stand and whom they want to have represent them in the years ahead. And second, the problems of American families will not be put on hold during the 6 or 7 weeks that we're back in our districts politicking. Then we'll all come back after the election. Many people will be in what's called a lame duck status, where they're not coming back, and we'll compress all of these decisions into 5 or 6 weeks. This is just not the proper way to legislate. It's not the proper way to govern our affairs. So I would urge members to oppose the previous question, which has the effect of putting on the floor legislation that would guarantee a tax relief for middle-class people, as well as the creation of jobs in our country because of clean energy. Now, you can agree or disagree with those propositions, but I don't think any of us disagrees with the proposition that in the face of these very real crises for the American people, we're just getting on the plane, getting on the bus, getting on the train, and leaving town. It's the wrong thing to do. We should oppose the previous question and vote no. I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah.
I'll reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire from my colleague if he has any other requests for time?
I actually don't think I have any other speakers. I may be surprised in the next few minutes, as will be the case, but it happens. Yeah.
Then I am prepared to close. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely regret that today we will consider legislation that has no chance of becoming law. Our constituents sent us here with an expectation that we will work together and deliver results. That doesn't mean that they expect us to abandon all of our principles, but it does mean that while we engage in fierce debate, we do so in the spirit of collaboration. And at the end of the day, we come together to produce bipartisan legislation that will address the major issues that are facing our country. For the last 2 years, the majority has actively avoided such bipartisan legislating, and as a result, we face a mounting number of issues that demand our attention. Sadly, none of those pressing issues are addressed in today's bills, and so I urge my colleagues to oppose today's rule and the underlying legislation. It is time we put aside political games and address the pressing national issues facing this country. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question, to defeat the previous question, and I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Speaker, in our discussion of this particular rule today, we have, as oftentimes is the case, wandered far and wide. I would point out to one of the speakers who was just up there that we should stay here doing the Sequestration Act. Dealing with the sequestration issue, the House did. On May 10th, we passed the Sequestration Replacement Act. Once again, it's sitting over on the Senate. To wait here until we do the middle-class tax cuts, we did that in August. It's waiting over on the Senate. To do something, we have issues that are significant in the two that are before us. If we're talking about welfare in some particular way, whether the rule that was made coming out of the executive branch was appropriate or not, we could go back and say why it was done. It is true the President in 1997 and once again in 1998 said he would not have supported the legislation that created the system that we have. It's also true that in the Washington Post editorial, they made comments that said the Obama administration is waiving the federal requirement that ensures a portion of able-bodied TANF recipients must engage in work activities. If this is not getting welfare reform, it's difficult to imagine what would be. But even if the substance of that was inaccurate, the fact that it was done by regulation, by rulemaking coming from the administrative branch, puts us in suspect category. Rules should not be establishing what is our priority. It should be laws made on this body. If you want to change it, if you want to do waivers, it should be coming from this particular body. The other half of it deals with coal. This is a nation with the largest coal reserves in the world. We have 500 years of potential electricity at cheap rates coming from coal. A coal plant today is as much as 99% cleaner than one built 40 years ago, and yet rules and regulations that have been promulgated or are being threatened to promulgate are one of those that impede the ability of building new plants. There is no valid reason why American coal industry should be suffering at the hands of overzealous Washington regulators, or why workers are being laid off in the Midwest, in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and other places, although today it was again announced that there will be 1,200 coal mining jobs that will be eliminated across central Appalachia by a company, one company. And once again, their essence is the kind of unfair regulations that are taking place. It is true that 3409 is cobbled together with other bills that have passed this body, but I would remind you that each of those 4 that have already passed this body were passed on a bipartisan vote, with anywhere between 16 and 37 Democrats, depending on the bill, joining with Republicans to pass those. And when put together in a package with 3409, presents a good package to make sure that we are in favor of cheap energy, energy that will drive and build our economy and provide jobs for those who need those particular jobs. I went historically in a while earlier because I wanted to say that we have faced these types of situations in the past in where the question was, should the President make the rules or regulations, or should Congress actually pass legislation? The President to whom I referred ended his tenure, somewhat bitter way, refusing to work with Congress, instead trying to go around Congress, which produced at that time a historic deadlock between the Presidency and the Congress. This is a nation of laws. Laws are made here. It's not a nation of rules. And if the rules and regulations are going to have the effect on the future and are going to have effect on American people, they should not be done by executive fiat. Whether you like them or not, they should not be done in that manner. It should be done here legislatively. That's the purpose of both of these issues that are tied together in this rule. That's the thread that comes together, whether or not we actually believe Congress should be doing the job of creating the standards and the rules, or we're willing to simply abrogate our responsibility, our power, our options to some other body. And I would hope that as Congress, we would be very careful and considerate about what our responsibility is, and we would take very seriously any encroachment on the role of law that is given to us by the Constitution. It was the vision of the Founding Fathers that this should be the body that makes those decisions, not the executive branch. This is a good bill. These are good bills. And this is a fair rule. We haven't even talked about the amendments that were made in order, but they do cover. In fact, we did have one statement about the amendment that was not made in order, and I half wish the member is no longer here, but his issue of concern is covered in another amendment that is made in order and will be discussed on this floor. So it is a fair rule. It will have a vigorous debate, and there are 2 good bills that will be brought before this body that I hope sincerely pass. I do urge their adoption, and I sincerely urge the adoption of this rule that will move us forward. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Mr.
Gentlelady
Speaker,
from New
I
York.
request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
So we have the House taking the first votes of the day, 2 votes in this series, beginning with a procedural vote pertaining to the rule providing for consideration of the rule for debating the welfare work requirement legislation and the Stop the War on Coal, both of these bills. After that, a vote on adoption of the rule for those 2 measures. And while this vote continues, we'll hear now from a Capitol Hill reporter who's looking at the Welfare to Work waiver bill expected to come up for debate this afternoon. David Harrison is staff writer for Congressional Quarterly. What exactly are House Republicans trying to achieve by introducing this disapproval resolution?
Well, the House Republicans are very upset about a rule that Secretary Sebelius, Secretary of Health and Human Services, rolled out in July, which would waive the work requirements for welfare, for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, in states that put forward a pilot programs to get more people back to work. The Republicans are very upset about this. They say it guts the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, and they're trying to undo it with this resolution.
What was the impetus for pursuing this legislation?
You mean the resolution here today?
Yeah.
It was that under the Congressional Review Act of 1996, the Congress can weigh in on administration rules, and in this case, both the House and the Senate have introduced these resolutions to basically try to block the rule. So if the resolution that's voted on today, if it's also approved in the Senate, and if President Obama signs it, then the rule will be blocked.
How are Democrats expected to vote on this?
Democrats will pretty much every single Democrat is going to vote against this. Democrats are they complain that the Republican opposition is nothing more than a political stunt designed to give Mitt Romney fodder for campaign commercials. So you'll probably hear some very impassioned speeches from Democrats on this.
Can you lay out the work requirements under the 1996 welfare law, and what are the changes the administration's making?
Yeah, no, this gets a little technical, but basically, overall, the Welfare Requirement Act, the Welfare Law of 1996 requires that all able-bodied adults who receive benefits, 50% of them must be engaged in some sort of work. Now, there are exceptions. States can do various things to various loopholes they can use. So in reality, only about 30% of recipients are engaged in work activities. What this would do would essentially say that the states complain that they spend an enormous amount of time tracking down these people, filing paperwork, doing all these bureaucratic tasks that take away from their ability to put people back to work. So what they want to do is they want a waiver from this 50% work requirement, so they can put in place their own programs that will ultimately put more people back to work. That's the idea.
Can you name some of the states that are pursuing these waivers?
Yeah, so so far no one's actually applied for them. We're still very early in the process, but the states that have asked the Secretary for this specifically are Utah, Nevada, I believe California, Minnesota, and Connecticut have also expressed interest. What's interesting about this, and this is a point that Democrats make repeatedly, is that both Utah and Nevada have Republican governors who have asked for this.
Well, the welfare law is set to expire at the end of September. What might happen if it's not renewed in time?
Yes, it expires in September. Well, if it's not renewed, the whole program goes away, but that's not going to happen. The House and Senate negotiators added a 6-month extension to the welfare law to TANF. In the spending bill, the 6-month stopgap spending bill that the House approved last week, I believe, and the Senate is debating this week. So assuming that gets through, and I think everybody assumes that eventually it will, the welfare program will continue for another 6 months. But you're right, we do need, there hasn't been a full-on reauthorization for, I think, a couple of years now, and so that's something that Congress is going to have to address eventually.
David Harrison is Congressional Quarterly staff writer. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much.
And once again, the House voting on a procedural motion related to the Welfare to Work bill. Debate on that expected this afternoon, and a bill concerning environmental regulation and policies. As votes continue coming in on the House floor, the Congressional Black Caucus met today during their 42nd annual legislative conference, and they talked about voter ID laws and voter requirements. Here's a look.
All this, Ron, you've been hearing this. Crystal, you've been hearing this. The first question for me is, is there any dispute to the idea that this is a clearly racialized, discriminatory set of policies and laws that are being implemented right now?
Let me go first. Thank you first for the invitation to come and the opportunity to interact with all of you. I think this is a very, very important discussion that we need to have. And when I listen, and as a student of history and now as a lawyer, I recognize that if it weren't for the efforts of John Lewis and many brave pioneers in the civil rights era, Crystal and I wouldn't even be sitting here today having this discussion, given their bravery and given their leadership. But as a lawyer and as a student of history, when you ask Dr. Hill, is this a racialization question or is this overtly discriminatory, I go back and I give you a few years to think about. In the year 2005, President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker chaired a commission looking at federal election reform. One of the key recommendations these two gentlemen made was that we must have a federal voter identification card to ensure the integrity of the ballot box and the electoral process. I move forward 3 years later to the year 2008. In the year 2008, the United States Supreme Court in Crawford versus Marion County Board of Elections took up this very issue of, is it discriminatory to have a voter ID? Does it marginalize people who are less well off and are of color? And third, does it meet constitutional muster? This was a 6-3 decision. This was not a stacked court. This was not a biased court. This was a 6-3 opinion that was written by the hardcore right-winger John Paul Stevens. And I say that facetiously, of course. But what they said was that it was constitutional, it was legal, and it was proper for Indiana to institute a voter ID system. It was proper that a Republican legislature had decided to enact this, and that while Democrats had complained and said that this was an overtly partisan method, the Supreme Court also said that that is part of the electoral process, and that's why citizens vote in the representatives who made those decisions. So the third date that I would come up with when you ask, is this a racialization question, is the year 2012, this very year that we're in right now. Earlier this year, the Richmond Times-Dispatch issued an editorial that said, "I'd like my crow served medium rare." In that particular editorial, they noted that they had strong opposition to the voter ID laws in Virginia that were going through the legislature. They thought that they were racist, and they thought that they were going to disproportionately impact people of color. Well, in April, they issued that editorial saying that they'd like their crow medium rare because they said that Virginia did have a problem, that there were 10 felons, convicted felons, who were found to have voted illegally. And also in April of this year, in a statewide report, they found 50 people in Virginia who voted illegally. And so the Richmond Times-Dispatch said that this was not a problem in search of a solution or a solution in search of a problem, but this was very real. And so from my perspective, is this racialization? We are all equal in this country under the color of law. These voter ID laws are designed specifically to allow people to have the confidence in the integrity in the ballot box that has been upheld by our Supreme Court and our rule of law. So no, Dr. Hill, I do not think this is a racialization.
And I would like to, if I may, Dr. Hill.
Please, everyone, let them respond. And Crystal, in your answer, I'd just like you to sort of, I want to push this forward just a little bit. So when you look at the data that suggests that when these laws get implemented, fewer black people vote, fewer black people have access to the polls.
Data, okay.
How is that not on its face a racialized set of laws and policies?
Well, I want to backtrack a little bit, and then I want to go to the data that nobody's mentioned and Ron Christie has touched on. I grew up knowing that my parents sat at lunch counters. My mom tells me these stories. They resonate with me because they've made me the woman I am, the fearless woman to have a different opinion, to sit here before you and say that I don't think Martin Luther King fought for us to be in the year 2012 to be told that blacks can't. I remember my mother telling me when she was a little girl she had to go to a segregated beach and had to sit on this side and watch the white people sunbathe, watch the white people enjoy all the beauty of the ocean and the sun, while she and her family knitted together blankets to have a canopy to protect themselves under. I remember my dad talking to me about when he went to the Medical College of Virginia, and he was the only black to integrate his dental class. He helped his white colleagues study. They got better grades than him. This did not deter my father. He continued, pressed on, and became a great dentist, and he still practices today. When we were little, my parents built their dream home in Richmond, Virginia, in a subdivision where they thought they would have access to a country club. I was in grade school, and my parents were told they couldn't swim their kids couldn't swim at the pool. They couldn't play tennis because we were black. They sued the Salisbury Country Club. Their case went all the way up to the Virginia Supreme Court. They won. They didn't win so that we could swim in the pool with the white people that didn't want us there. They won to teach their children, myself and my brothers, to fight for what is right. So that experience that I have growing up, being told that in the face of adversity I could always achieve, This does not jive with voter ID laws. And folks, here are the facts. Voter ID laws are not Jim Crow because they apply to all of us no matter what our skin color. And I want to go back to the Brennan Center stats that respectfully Congressman Fudge highlighted. 89% of Americans in this country have the proper ID to vote. Whose fault is it that 25% of black Americans will not or cannot get an ID? Whose fault is that? When others seem to get IDs, and did you know in 2008 when the Supreme Court ruled on Indiana's voter ID law, they found it to be constitutional. And guess what? After the laws were passed in Indiana and Georgia, minority participation in the electoral process increased for blacks by 40%. And in Georgia in 2010, when the Republicans were experiencing a surge, guess what? More black voter turnout in Georgia increased by 40%. Latino and Hispanic voter turnout increased by 140%. So why? And American University and the University of Delaware have all found that none of the voter ID laws that have been passed have deterred people from the polls, no matter what the color of their skin. So I find it very hard to believe, and I'm tired of being talked down to as a black woman and being told what I can't do. To me, our message needs to be, what's wrong with the 11%? They need to get with the game and get an ID to vote, because voter fraud does occur. We know that in Colorado, in 2010, 5,000 non-citizens voted. We know in the tight race between Norm Coleman and Al Franken, that race was won by 312 votes. You know what's happened right now? 217 of those votes 170 of those votes have been found to be fraudulent, and those individuals have been convicted. 66 of those votes are now being crimes are being brought against the 66 other people. That was a vote, I will remind everybody, that Minnesota seat, that senatorial seat, after Al Franken won, that was the vote that decided Obamacare. So, you know, fraud does occur. Fraud matters. And if we checked IDs, which we don't do primarily unless we have voter ID laws, we would know the kind of fraud that was occurring. So I disagree.
I was supposed to be going to a Google Hangout, but I have three members of Congress and the civil rights leader about to jump out their chairs.
And I'm going to be very, very brief.
I'm going to very quickly, because we have to move this along a little bit. I'm going to let Reverend Sharpton and Congresswoman Fudge respond. I'm going to let the Congresswoman go first.
And I'm going to be very, very brief. I don't know that anyone here said that we can't do something. The question is, why should we? We fought this battle 40 years ago.
Why shouldn't we?
Why should we be forced to be? No, I'll let you speak. Please let me. No one here is saying we can't. All of us have overcome something in our lives. That's not the issue. But we fought a battle for equality and justice a long time ago. If we don't stand up for it now, our children and grandchildren will be fighting it 40 years from now.
One second, Crystal. I'll give you a chance to get back in, but we're going to do this
Then you raise whose fault it is that people don't have IDs. My grandmother's birth certificate is my Bible. She didn't have a birth certificate. It's in the Bible. These young people that live in cities like New York, Philadelphia, they don't even drive. So why do they need a driver's license? They take public transportation. A lot of them don't have jobs because of the way this economy is going. Disabled people don't drive. Why do they need an ID? We have to look at who has been singled out in this process. It is students. It is poor people. It is the elderly. It is the disabled. It is people who historically vote Democratic.
Okay.
It is predetermined.
I'm going to have to pause. I'm going to let Reverend Sharpton respond, and then we got to get to this hangout.
Very good. You're preaching now. First of all, we can have different opinions, but we can't have different facts. The fact.
And where were my facts different? Where were my facts wrong?
I didn't interrupt you one time.
But you implied.
I interrupted you one time.
You implied my facts were different.
Quoted us and we didn't.
We're going to let everyone respond. We're going to let everyone engage.
I don't think we should misrepresent the truth.
The Indiana case that the Supreme Court ruled was not the same ID laws that we're dealing with in Pennsylvania and in other states. You're acting as though that one case is a uniform ID law. As Congresswoman Fudge said, we have state by state different laws. Texas has one law, Pennsylvania another law, Ohio another law. If in fact as Ron Christie said, they had the National Federal ID Law, you could say that. We're talking about different states, different laws, and we should not act as though the Supreme Court ruling said that. As a case in point, a fact is a Texas federal court just said it is discriminatory, the ID laws that they put in Texas in 2012. That's one. That's one. That's a fact. That's a fact. Secondly, when we talk about people that were foreigners voting, that has nothing to do with people that are American-born ID laws. Saying that somebody fraudulently voted, people can fraudulently vote, ID laws would not protect that. You're mixing apples and oranges. Thirdly, to say, why doesn't 11% have their ID and why can't we catch up with the game? Why change the rules of the game in the fifth inning? Nobody, when you change these state laws, mostly early this year and late last year, the game was already on for this election. We are not talking about changing something later. We're talking about changing something now. People cannot vote now that could have voted in the last election, and many did. That is changing the game mid-game. And don't blame people for not being prepared for a game that you changed the rule. If we're having a 12-round fight, and in the middle of the fight, you want to change it to an 8-round fight, you have shaved off 4 rounds. Don't tell me why wasn't I prepared. Why did you change the game?
A portion of the Congressional Black Caucus meeting taking place today. You can see it in its entirety at our website. Go to cspan.org. Here in the House, members voting on a procedural motion related to approval of the rule for debating 2 measures, the welfare work requirement legislation and the bill concerning environmental regulation and policies.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Hastings of Florida. Mr. Hastings of Florida votes no. Mr. Keating. Mr. Keating votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 238 and the nays are 179. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
From New York.
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient